At Unregistered Academy, we are announcing, right now, our new slate of winter courses. Starting this week, as part of our Great Book series, we have Aristotle's Politics. Then, soon after that, we will start the history of the Cold War, and that will be followed by our next Great Books course, the Bible. Go to unregisteredacademy.com and sign up now. I'll see you in class. This is the Unregistered podcast, and I'm Thaddeus Russell. This is a show about ideas, people, and behaviors that are considered inappropriate, out of bounds, or beyond the pale. The things you're not supposed to talk about if you're a school teacher, a college professor, a businessman, a politician, a parent, a neighbor, or even a podcast host. These are the things you're not supposed to say or even think if you're a good liberal, a good conservative, or a good citizen. Each week, I'll interview a person who has something bad to say. They might be a journalist or a professor. They might be a porn star or a drug dealer. They might just be an ordinary person with an ordinary job who doesn't care about the rules of polite society. I'm not interested in breaking the rules just to be a troublemaker. I'm interested in people who break the rules of conventional thought and to expand the scope of what is possible to say in our society. I'm interested in people who make me think. My guest this week has the weird idea that art creates humanity. But I think he might be right. This is my interview with J.F. Martel. I am joined from Ottawa, this place called Canada, by J.F. Martel, who is a very brilliant man who has written a very brilliant book, although you did originally call it a manifesto, did you not?
I didn't want to call it a manifesto, but it was part of a manifesto series, which that's why there's a little manifesto at the beginning. That I was contractually obliged to write that bit. But yeah, it is in a sense a manifesto.
Well, I would say that part of it's a manifesto, and
right.
And a lot of it is something else. Is a lot more. There's a lot in this book. So anyway, it's called Reclaiming Art in the Age of Artifice. And it's, I think, a bit of a cult classic. It has quite a following and a passionate following, which is reflected in the audience that you have for your podcast called Weird Studies that you co-host with Professor Phil Ford, which is also quite brilliant. And I was telling you before we started recording that I had to thank you for writing work that is so interesting to me. And being in the presence of a real public intellectual, someone who's actually so brilliant with words, but also making original arguments and original analyses. And I just find it just fascinating. It's why I got into this business in the first place. So just, thank you for doing this, for being a real public intellectual.
Thank you. I'm I'm glad I make the cut at this point. Everybody talks about imposter syndrome these days, and
yeah,
I confess that I've been guilty of that particular disorder.
Well,
so sometimes I wonder what it is I'm doing, but yeah, I just at some point I decided that I might sound like a fool, and that was okay. And I just went off and said what I had to say, and then, let things happen as they did. So,
oh, you fool.
Yeah, exactly.
No, I don't have fools on my show, actually.
Well, that's another good sign for me.
No, nor do I get excited reading books written by fools. So I don't think you qualify as a fool.
Have you gotten to the part about the fool though yet? There's a whole bit about the fool.
The archetype of the fool.
Yeah, the archetype of the fool, which is a very perfectly noble archetype.
So speaking of imposter syndrome, one of the many things I like about you, JF, is that, as I understand it, you don't have really an academic background, or you don't come out of the academy. Is that right?
No, I went to university. I went to the University of Ottawa, and then I went and was preparing to do a PhD in Toronto. In fact, I just wanted to skip the master's degree, so I was trying to gather up the credits I needed to qualify for this thing, and then I just decided to stop, and I never went back. And then I got into filmmaking at that point. That was one of my dreams at the time. I've always been a bit of a dabbler. So I was doing music, I was doing film, I was really interested in philosophy and history. And finally I just decided to become what I've always called self-unemployed, which means I just did what seemed inspiring and promising in the moment. So I left university, I started making short films, and eventually that led me into a career in TV. So I became a documentary filmmaker, director, writer in the Canadian television industry.
Yeah.
Did that for a while, and then I'm doing less and less of that now, and more podcasting and writing, which I mean, the one kind of constant throughout this process has been the nonfiction writing. I've always been interested in writing about ideas. So I guess in the end, that's what wins out, you know? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you have all the chops, all the intellectual chops of a professor, but you write better than most of them. And I mean, you're quite a stylist. And it's again, this is why I love reading your book so much. It's you really turn a phrase. And by the way, the podcast is similar. I mean, you and Phil are both real wordsmiths, and I really appreciate
Thank you.
listening to and reading people who can really speak and write. And I think anybody will enjoy just listening to you guys, just the aesthetic. And speaking of aesthetics, just the aesthetic quality of your work is just so high. So JF, yeah, it's a manifesto in part. I mean, I think that it begins, like the impetus for it is is for a manifesto. You're very unhappy with the state of the world, right? You know, and I kind of I wander around, I mean, kind of literally wander around, often wondering, like, how bad is the world? And I think about art, and I think about culture, and I'm still trying to decide, which is why your work is so arresting to me, because it's kind of grabbing me by the neck and telling me, you know, your world sucks.
Right.
Culture sucks. Art sucks nowadays. And so I want to explore this with you, and see if I agree with you, or to what extent I agree with you. Describe the world you're living in, that we are living in, and what's wrong with it? What's the problem?
Well, I mean, I think there's a fairly broad consensus, you know, concerning the state of the world, that we're in a fragile state. You know, things are, if not crumbling, then at least in danger of doing so at any point, at any moment, it seems. So so I've been feeling that, but I've always thought that we had taken a wrong turn somewhere. It's like a feeling. Maybe it's like I have a kind of Gnostic impulse, you know, like the Gnostics believe that the world was fundamentally flawed. Something was fundamentally wrong with creation. I wouldn't go so far. In fact, when I learned that about the Gnostics, that shocked me, and I never really agreed with that. But insofar as human society is concerned, I've always felt like there was something wrong, something we were getting wrong. So that's just a purely affective sensibility thing with me. But then I think when I started to make films, and I was, you know, there were films that really inspired me, and film directors whom I wanted to follow in their footsteps, and of course I came face to face with the reality of the film industry, such as it is, and I was quickly disillusioned by I'm a Gen Xer, just the sellout culture of art, and the way that a great vision will be turned into a tawdry cliche, just as a matter of course, as it evolves through the system, as it goes through the production cycle. And I at some point, when I was living in Montreal, I ended up working with a big company that's based out of that city. And they do big immersive environments, projection, like really impressive stuff. And I was working with them. And there was one project that I worked on, which was basically the idea was to develop a kind of local mythology for a gated community that would be built in, I think it was Louisiana.
Hmm.
And so it was like this community was being constructed on just a lot somewhere, probably like drained bayous or something, I don't know. And they were building this place, and they had the names of the, the land. There were, it was kind of mapped out. Nobody really knew the history of this place. It didn't really have a history, so they wanted to generate one. And so I was hired to do their Christmas show, and we created new Christmas characters and new Christmas stories. The project never got off the ground because of Katrina, so it never happened. But while I was working on this, I thought, wow, this is a really strange use of aesthetics. It's like we're world building out in the world. And during that time, I was also reading a lot of Marshall McLuhan and thinking about the power of advertising and publicity, and the sordid history of those disciplines, if you follow them back to their roots in like war propaganda. And I just became keenly aware that the aesthetic was being used to control, to develop a society rooted in a kind of like, not so much a disciplinary society. I know that you're a fan of Foucault, but society, as Deleuze called it, a society of control, where the goal is not so much to punish and discipline those who disobey, but rather to shape the vocabulary of the possible, to put in the guardrails of the conceivable. And that's something you can only achieve aesthetically. It's something you can only achieve using the tools of art, using symbols, using story, narrative. And I realized that out of all my friends, the most successful artist friends I had were the ones who had found a place in that market, in that racket.
Right.
And I didn't blame them. We all have to make a living, but it just occurred to me that nobody was, even the entire question of art was kind of off the table. Nobody was discussing what is real art. The minute you started talking about, well, I don't think that's art, this is art, and I have a definition for that, you were seen as some kind of snob, or at worst, some kind of like, I don't know. So it was almost sinful to do that, because I'd been raised in a kind of relativist, anything goes kind of mentality with regard to the aesthetic. So I thought, well, I just thought maybe I can make an argument here that will at least allow people to distinguish between what's going on in, I don't know, James Joyce's Ulysses from what's going on in the latest, the razor blade commercial or whatever. We didn't even have that language, I thought. So that's why I wrote the book. So what's wrong with the world? Where we have a kind of symbol crisis. We have a narrative and story crisis. I think that we don't know what kind of story we're telling together anymore. And that has become, I think it's at the level of the aesthetic, the level of what Henri Corbin called the imaginal, right? The imagination perceived as a real aspect of reality. That's the battleground today. That's where the fight's happening. And the stakes couldn't be higher, because what's at stake is the possible itself, so yeah. And on the one hand, I'm very happy that we live in a society that's functioning, and that we have, like, it's mid-February here in Ottawa, and it's really cold outside, and I'm nice and warm in my office. I'm very grateful for the society we've constructed, but I feel that we're using that, well, I guess privilege, for lack of a better term, to play dangerous games with the question of what existence means, why we're here, what is morality, these kind of big archetypal questions. We're playing fast and loose with them in this system that we live under. That's a kind of vague way of putting it. To start. Maybe you can start digging into it.
So much there. Okay, so I guess tell me about, let's just say, for instance, the state of film? You're a filmmaker and you do film criticism. Like nowadays, what would you say about the state of film, cinema now?
Oh, well, there are good films and there are lots of bad films being made. I mean, I think if you look at the latest listings of what's playing at the movie theater, you'll find that probably the majority of films are superhero movies.
Mhm.
I don't think it's any easier now than it was when I was trying to get feature films off the ground, to get an art film made or a film that really tries to probe and to push the medium. I think that's always been difficult to do. There have been times in the history of film, which is very, very young history, it hasn't been around for a long time, where there were times when there was a kind of effervescence or an opening and all kinds of great work was made. Think about, late 60s in Hollywood, for example, or
Right.
France a decade before.
Mhm.
But and you can't expect film to always be in that state of innovation and like kind of like deeply original kind of creation. But
Mhm.
um, I think that it's been the language of film has been thoroughly codified.
Mm.
The industry has been um, rationalized, to use Max Weber's term, to a point where it decides ahead of time what sorts of films are going to be made. And I think it's probably harder now to get a great film off the ground. Every artist has to work with all of the cliches that have developed in his or her medium. And in film, because of the nature of the medium itself, it's an expensive medium. It requires collaboration between a large number of people. The need for consensus tends to favor the kind of codification of cliches, and it favors repetition over original kind of expression. So film has always been a very, very powerful medium, but also a very, very difficult medium to push a vision through. When you compare it, for example, to poetry, which is probably the easiest medium in terms of getting a poem out there. But the problem is that nobody reads it.
Right.
So yeah, the problem has always been, for me, the capitulation of the moral imagination in favor of a utilitarian, instrumentalist, or commercial imagination, where what we choose to do with our imaginations becomes predicated on something other than exploring the depths of the real. It becomes about coming up with what will sell, coming up with what people will appreciate, or whatever, what people want. I think, as Alan Moore said, that artists shouldn't give people what they want, but what they need. And and so that's kind of a perennial problem.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I don't know. Can you work with that?
Let's distinguish first between the Hollywood studio system, which is really what you've been talking about, right? And all other filmmaking. Well, in terms of your criticisms, I mean, you're saying there's a decline in create. Well, maybe okay. Yeah. So you're saying there's been a decline in creativity since the 70s, right?
Yeah.
And it's become codified. Filmmaking has become thoroughly codified, I think you said.
Yeah.
And we're saying it wasn't so in the 70s, or at least in the late 60s and early 70s, which is generally considered, like, what's it called, the golden age of American cinema. And
it's one of them,
all my favorite films, most of them are from that era. But that was, so Hollywood in the 60s and 70s was being quite creative and original and brave, right, in many cases.
Yeah.
And now they just make 27 Spider-Man movies in a row.
Yeah, exactly.
And okay, so within sort of the formal Hollywood studio system, that seems indisputable, that what you're saying, that the willingness to be creative, to take chances, to challenge people's ideas and minds, that's declined, But what about independent filmmaking? You said it's about as difficult now to make an independent art film as it was in the 70s. But are there more? Are there just as many? Are there fewer interesting art movies now?
I think there are always good movies coming out. The problems with independent filmmaking, and here I'm speaking as someone who works in a country that has a highly subsidized film industry, is that the problem isn't so much the dollar, but the government, right? And government policy, and then you're getting into questions of a kind of political interference into the filmmaking process, which or into the art making process, where suddenly the artist has to be coming up with ideas that seem to fit the particular moral paradigm of the day as expressed through the kind of political discourse, and then that can be a limiting force on art as well. I mean, art should be about exploring the depths of the real as it exists in the human psyche, and that should be an unfettered endeavor. We should be able to go deep, and what we want is a culture that appreciates that and that wants to find out what's going on deep down in the psyche. But I just think essentially that the situation we're in is one where the goal increasingly, as we move towards a more and more kind of authoritarian political apparatus, and I mean this, and I'm not taking sides here, I'm saying all across the political landscape, there's kind of a drift towards more and more authority being vested in specific kind of nodes that then determine how people can live and what people can say and what people can do.
Totally.
So the real, like as I was saying before, the place where that fight is being fought out is the imagination, is at the level of narrative, at the level of how we imagine. The minute you talk about the future, what the future should be like, you know, and every political revolutionary or political reformer or whatever is, when they speak politics, they're talking about the future. They're already sharing a kind of territory with the artists because they're molding an aesthetic idea of what the future will bring. And so I think that control over the imagination has become the prime directive for those of us who are intent on bringing about more tightly controlled, more regulated, more easily predictable sort of society. So
the control of the imagination. Yes.
Yeah. And that's not just Hollywood, right? That's also, you know, government art funding bodies. That's it's the educational system. Museums, galleries. Yeah. It's everywhere. And it's okay. Those things can exist so long as artists know what art is, because one of the email I get the most often, I get it from, and it's always beautifully written by different people. I'm not saying that they're all writing me the same thing, but the email I get the most often is some variation on this. I am an artist. Thank you so much for writing this book. I had forgotten why I got into it. Now I remember. You've made me remember. And I'm not doing that to, like, you know, toot my own horn. I'm just saying we know this. In fact, what I'm saying is I'm not saying anything new in this book. I'm just saying something we all feel about the nature of the imagination and the power of expression, of aesthetic expression. And nobody gets into painting when they're 8 years old thinking, oh, one day I'll work for Ford Motors, you know, and I'll make their billboards. No, you get in and you're looking at Picasso, you're looking at the Sistine Chapel, or you're looking at, I don't know. That's what inspires you, because that type of art, real art, speaks for itself. It automatically makes its mark on us. Yeah,
we have not even gotten close to the heart of your argument, which contains a definition, a very provocative definition of art. We'll get to that in a second.
Yeah,
you call, in the title of your book, you call the time we're living in the age of artifice.
Yeah.
What is artifice, and how do you know there's more of it now than before?
Well, it is a provocation. Having said that, I mean, I think at one point in the book, I'm like, I concede that artifice has always been a use. Okay, so artifice is the use of aesthetics for non-aesthetic ends. Okay, so if I'm using aesthetic means of getting you to do something. Instead of asking you, can you please pass the salt? I do a little dance that implants the idea that I need salt in your mind, and then you do it. That's artifice. There's a level of aesthetic expression that's just like kind of woven into the fabric of life. So I'm not saying that artifice is bad. What I'm saying is that whereas artifice, spectacle, the aesthetic in a general sense has always been used by political, economic forces to convey a message or to pass a directive without having to appeal to the free choice, the kind of rational mind of the subject. Whereas that's always happened. I mean, you can go back to like just Vlad Tepes in Romania, who would impale like his defeated enemies on sticks and create forests of impaled bodies. That's artifice. It's a spectacle that expresses a very clear message. You could talk about the Roman circus. You could talk about all kinds of things that have happened over history. The explosion of media in the 20th century basically just changed that completely. It made the aesthetic the prime tool for for political domination and economic domination. And so from that point on, and this is something that Marshall McLuhan explores in his work, media becomes the way of doing politics. And what happens is that this tool, the use of spectacle and artifice to coerce and to persuade, it metastasizes across the lands. It's in everything.
Right.
And that's why we live in an age of artifice. I mean, just the fact that we're talking through Zoom here, the computer in itself is not an aesthetic tool, but the personal computer is very much an aesthetic tool. It's giving you an experience, that has been devised. It's telling a story. It's drawing you into a story. So when I talk about the age of artifice, I mean that we are absolutely ensconced today in a play of images that is going on all around us, some of which is under control of certain forces, some of which is kind of just going wild on its own. And we have to become aware of that. It's what McLuhan called becoming aware of the environment, right? The environment of our times is what I call in the books the spectral age. And so we must become aware of it. And then when we create art or when we consume art, I hate that word consume, but we can do it in full consciousness of what's going on, of what the background is, of what the environment is.
Right.
Yeah.
So artifice is not art. You can moralize about it or not. The use of aesthetics to manipulate, right, is artifice.
Yeah.
The use of aesthetics to manipulate people into submitting to political authority or to buying a product.
Correct. Okay.
So you're calling that artifice. And you're saying we live in an age in which artifice is dominant.
Yeah. It has proliferated. Yeah.
Okay. So I agree with all of that. But I guess the bottom line there is that what you're saying is ultimately is you can like that or not. You can like commercials on TV that use aesthetics to manipulate you to buy a hamburger or not. But it's just the point you, I think, ultimately want to make is that is not art. Art is art is a different thing. Yeah. And this is where you get very deep, and it's it's not that complex. It's just it's a fascinating argument. So let's try to unpack this carefully. Mm-hmm. JF, what is art?
It's art. Okay, I think every chapter in the book answers it differently. Yeah. Right. And the goal isn't to kind of my method wasn't dialectical. where I would just go move on from chapter. Like I could have ordered the chapters differently. So in a weird way, it's just looking at things from different angles and trying to get at something that no particular conceptual apparatus will completely capture. But today, how I would define art as follows. Art is the creation of symbols. So art is about creating symbols. And then the question is, well, what is a symbol? So if you adopt a kind of semiotic kind of picture of reality, right? So semiotics is the study of signs. You can conceive of reality as a kind of scintillating network of signs, right? So if you're a tick, for example, you're going to live with very few signs. Like a tick understands what? It understands light, heat. It has just a few, like 4 or 5 signs that guides the tick up on a branch, allows it to fall onto an animal, find the place where the blood is flowing, and then basically just drill down into the animal and die there. That's what a tick does. So it needs enough signs to be able to do that. Humans are very special because although we have a bunch of kind of biologically determined signs that we evolved to kind of work with, we are also able to see that the signs are signs. Like the tick doesn't need a word for the light. It just needs to respond to light. Whereas we can see, well, this is how the tick responds to light, and this is how I respond to light, and this is how that animal responds to light, the bat or whatever. And then I can come up with the concept light, right? So we have a way of kind of transcending our the biological determinism of our species as simply an evolved organism, right? So that's a mystery in itself, how we got there. But the point is this: if you take a sign and you frame it out of the world, for instance, let's say the example in the book is, imagine you're in, for some reason, I always imagine this scene taking place in India somewhere. You're in a city in India, in Delhi or something, and there's an old, beautiful wall. The paint's kind of peeling off of it, and there's a door in the wall. And the wall is at the back of maybe a restaurant. And of course, the door leads to the latrine or the toilet. But let's say you take a photo of that door and you just show it to someone. So you know, as the photographer, that was the door to the bathroom, to the washrooms. But to the person looking at the picture, it's simply a door. And so it has no semiotic value. Not only is it just a door, it's a door in a photo. You can't use the door. The sign has been extracted from its usual setting in kind of a causal system and become a symbol. The doorness of the door suddenly strikes you. What is a door? It's not hard to go from the thought of the door as door to the thought of the gate to the underworld, the door to the interior world, the door to another place, an elsewhere, some kind of elsewhere that is not reducible to any particular place on earth. You can see how symbols emerge through the extraction of signs from their simple kind of just so setting in a causal system of physical cause and effect. So the point is that this capacity to create symbols, to take things out of the world and frame them such that we can look at them as they are without any necessary attachment to any particular thing, that's the beginning for me of art. And you can see that if you look at the old cave art of the Chauvet Cave or the Lascaux caves, where you see these animals drawn or painted onto the walls of the cave without context, simply as they are, and yet absolutely packed with meaning, precisely because they have no semiotic function. They can't be reduced to a use. They can't be reduced to a kind of pre-programmed cause and effect kind of interaction that would determine how you approach it. They simply are there. So art, this is why I think Paul Klee said art makes the invisible visible. It takes what is visible, finds what is invisible in it, its mystery, its strangeness, its symbolic charge, and makes it visible to us in the frame of the artwork. And it sounds like I'm just talking about visual art, but I think this applies to all media.
Right.
I'm not sure if that makes any sense or if that's the right place to start, but that's a definition of art. That's not what's going on in your Chevrolet commercial.
Exactly. That's it.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So utility is the crux of it, right? If there is a utility to the thing, it's not art, according to J.F. Martel.
It can have utility, but that's not where the art in it.
The purpose of it. It cannot be utilitarian. Is that right?
Well, I mean, it could be. That's the weird thing. This is where things are not so black and white, because you can have something that's made with a purpose in mind. For example, I can imagine Kurt Cobain maybe wrote some songs that were intended to piss off specific people. Right? I'm just making this up. I don't know if that's the case, but certainly Roger Waters, he's not very popular these days. He said some nasty things recently, supposedly. I don't know what it is, but Roger Waters of Pink Floyd has written a lot of
for the
songs.
record, he's been right lately, but that's okay. It's a different.
Is he? Okay.
Yeah, it's okay.
I just saw this email come through that someone is accusing him of being an anti-Semite, but I didn't know what the context was. But anyways, Roger Waters has written songs that were taking aim at specific people. There's a song on the Animals, the Pink Floyd album, called is it Pigs? Yeah, I think it's Pigs, and it's he basically is calling out Margaret Thatcher at one point in the song. Okay, so that's artifice, right? He's telling us what to think about Margaret Thatcher. It's a worldly use. The song has a purpose,
and to get people to vote against Margaret Thatcher also. Right?
Exactly, to get people to vote against Margaret Thatcher.
Right.
He's got a very clear agenda, and he's using the aesthetic to get it through. Okay, so that part of it is artifice. So you might decide, oh, that song's just artifice, but no, the song has all kinds of weird. What's the word in music? Overtones, undertones, overtones that are not intended, that exceed the agenda, and that turn the song into much more than simply a political tool. That's not always the case. There's a lot of stuff that's nothing more than the artifice, right? But in some cases, the artist's personal agenda, which he or she might really use to try to get the thing out there and to get it made, will nevertheless betray them insofar as the final work transcends that agenda. So it's not simply a matter of pointing to different artworks and saying that's art, that's artifice, that's art, that's artifice. That's what I wanted to avoid, but rather that whatever it is that makes a work of art that was made, let's say 150 years ago, still relevant now, is not its political purpose. That's not what makes art memorable. That's simply a material cause, as Aristotle would put it. It's part of the material. It's as important as the fact that the book was printed on this type of paper, or that painting was made with this type of paint. That all these things are absolutely important, essential for the art to exist in the first place, but that's not what makes the art memorable. It's not the fact that that paint was used that makes, Hammershøi's painting so special to us today. He could have used any paint. The point is that the image transcends whatever Hammershøi. I'm thinking of a painter I really like, a Danish painter whom I recommend your listeners check out. The painting he made transcended his own, whatever conception he had of what it could be. Obviously, it was more, because the world has become something that would be unimaginable to Hammershøi. We're in a totally different universe, and yet the work still resonates. So, and that's even more true for the Chauvet cave paintings that were made 40,000 years ago and remain as numinous and as powerful today as they ever were. I'm not sure we'd feel the same if we found, for example, we found tons of Greek graffiti in the Eastern Mediterranean all over the place, right? And although it's great to find 2,000-year-old graffiti, there's a difference between that and the fragments of statuary we find from that time. It's just, there's a different order. The minute something, it's, for some reason, certain aesthetic constructs, certain aesthetic creations touch on a layer of reality that we have forgotten exists, largely, that it's not in our interest to believe it exists, and yet it is there. And the art that we hold on to, the art that marks us, that hits us, that really bowls us over, is the art that materializes, I think, that expresses that layer of reality. And that's what I was calling the imaginal earlier. So this is where some faith is required for the theory to work, to believe that there is such a layer of reality at all, right?
So if one intends to use aesthetics to manipulate other people, one is not being an artist.
Well, I mean, again, ideally, no.
That part of it, that particular intention is not artistic. Like Roger Waters, when he's writing those songs, sometimes he's being artistic and sometimes he's not. Sometimes when he's trying to get you to vote for the Labor Party, he's being not artistic. But there are other things, his use of overtones and undertones, that is artistic because it's not an attempt to manipulate. Is that right?
Yeah. I was using the word overtones and undertones metaphorically for the resonances, or like, I'm trying to find a word that's not musical, the aspects of the work that he put in out of his collaboration with his co-musicians, his own kind of genius. He can't help but make the work much more than simply the message. The work is saying things he didn't intend it to say. You know, there's something that I believe is true, is that you can go in with an agenda and create art, but the art will be great to the extent that it betrays you.
Right. Betrays the agenda.
The agenda.
Right.
Yeah.
Oscar Wilde, and you quote him a lot. Oscar Wilde said, art, I think this is right, art is useless.
All art is quite useless.
All art is quite useless. And
yes, but he says this at the end of a wonderful text, the preface to where he says a lot of other things too. And so that what he means by all art is quite useless is art is the transcendence of the utilitarian paradigm, which we as good social Darwinists have been told is the end all and be all of reality. Art is what calls us to a deeper sense of the real, that delivers us from that utilitarianism.
Right. Okay. Let's stay with artifice for a while. Then we're going to dig into your theory of what art is. So you talk about pornography and propaganda, right?
Yeah.
This is a good way to sort of concretize your point about what artifice is. So I think people have an easy time understanding this. Pornography uses aesthetics, of course, right? There's lighting and there's attempts to make things look attractive, and there's sound and there's that's attempting to be attractive and all that. But it's very obviously the pornographer is interested in only one single thing, which is to arouse sexual attraction to the thing that's being presented.
Yeah. Pornography is the use. Yeah, exactly. It's the use of the aesthetic to provoke attraction to the object. So you created an object and you design in such a way that the percipient will be attracted to it.
Right.
It doesn't necessarily take sexual form. It could be
a hamburger,
car commercial, a hamburger. Yeah.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
So commercials then are pornography.
Yes.
Right?
And PSAs are the opposite. Yeah.
Right. Well, PSA would be propaganda.
Exactly.
Okay. So propaganda is the same process, but in the service of a political end, right? To manipulate people to vote a particular way or to think about a political issue in a particular way. Is that right? Okay.
It gives you something that insofar as that thing is real, is going to be infinitely complex and makes it seem very, very simple. And the conclusion with propaganda is always that you should be repelled by this thing. Right. So it gives you something to recoil from.
Right.
It's the opposite. Propaganda gives you the object and creates an attraction to it in you. And it should be, ideally, should be the same attraction in everyone. It doesn't matter how different you are from me. Like when they screen, like in Hollywood, when they do focus groups, right, to test out a film, they're not trying to find out how each person in that room reacted in some singular way to this film. They want to find how the broadest swath of the population they can calculate and they can quantify will react to this film, and they will trim the film in light of this imaginary everyman, every woman that doesn't actually exist. So there's a simplification that the work of artifice, the work of propaganda or the work of pornography doesn't just simplify its object, it simplifies its subject. Every man is the same man watching porn.
Right.
You
Well,
know?
yeah. So the value of pornography or propaganda can be reduced to a single number. The number of people who chose to vote against Margaret Thatcher because of your PSA. You can reduce it to a single number. The number of people who bought the McDonald's hamburger because of the commercial that they saw.
It's always quantifiable. It needs
quantifiable.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So this theory of art is actually not mine. This is my adaptation of James Joyce's theory of art, which he delivers in his book, A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man, and he gets it from Thomas Aquinas.
Oh, right.
So there's it's got a history, this idea, but this is my kind of take on it. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So I think people are probably clear about all this. I think this all makes sense, and I'm in broad agreement with this. I mean, you're not saying that this is like the absolute universal definition of what is and what is not art. You're saying this is your definition. Is that right?
Well, no, I'm saying, I am. Well, I'm saying this might, but even for me, it's just a heuristic. It's not like I'm not an essentialist. I don't believe that any particular object, I mean, with certain exceptions, will fall. I mean, there are great erotic works of art, and there are great didactic works of art as well. The point is that I'm trying to find the dynamics in the aesthetic to try to work out a model that allowed me to understand. The goal is not to define artifice, but to define art. And in order to do that, I first had to start with what is definitely not art. So I started there. And so I'm dealing with there's something caricaturesque about this model, but it's still, I find it useful.
Right. And that's why we started with artifice.
Yeah.
So exactly. now we're gonna get into the meat of it.
Yeah.
And I'm actually excited just thinking about talking about this, because it's really, you do some things in the book and in the podcast that really make me think really hard, which is exactly what I want in a person.
Okay.
So so you say you're not an essentialist. Now I just have to say, like, we're friends now, and I like you a lot, but buddy, you are an essentialist.
I couldn't believe I was listening to myself say that, and I'm like, well, there are ways in which I'm an essentialist. Yes, I do believe in essences. Yeah,
but boy, it is hard to pin you down. So, okay, so let's start with the Chauvet caves. A cave in France. So it's a cave in France. You spoke about talk about a little bit more about what it is. There's a famous documentary by Herzog on it.
Yeah.
These caves or the art in the caves is how old? Like 30,000 years, is that right?
30 to 40, 35, something like that. Over 30,000 years old. It's right. I think they found older art since, but at the time that Herzog made his film, it was the oldest known art.
Right. So they discovered pictures on the walls in this cave.
Yeah.
What were the pictures of, or what are the pictures of?
Animals, ibex, horses, animals in abstract shapes. And slowly, as time passed, there's the slow emergence of human figuration, but that's very late in the story. Yeah.
But that's still thousands of years ago, right? Like everything.
All of this is tens of thousands of years ago. Yeah.
Super duper old stuff.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you say that, here it is. Artistic expression does not appear to have evolved over time. So you're saying, and we'd have to look at the art ourselves to judge this, but you're saying that the quality of the art, or there's something about the art in that cave, is the same as the art today.
Yeah.
Okay. I got that right.
Yeah.
Not only across time is it the same or similar, but across space, of course, because that's in France and we're in the United States, and there's also art going on in South Korea and wherever. Exactly. Right. And you're saying there is something that's connecting all of it, that there's something.
Oh yeah.
They're all part of some line, some some lineage.
I think, yeah. Sorry,
Oof.
you want to?
No, my head hurts from thinking about that. I'm trying to, and then you say something else, man, which I love. You say, and I can't remember, I think this was in your podcast, not in your book. You say, maybe it is in the book. You say that art is always paranormal.
Yeah.
Now, when I hear that the art in a cave in France 30,000 years ago is the same as art in the United States in 2023, I think there's got to be something mystical going on here. There's something paranormal. Got to be. It's the only explanation for it, right?
Yeah.
Well, what the fuck, man? Are you saying that like there's this thing that you're calling art that like floats outside of us, outside of human beings, and every once in a while an artist will tap into that thing and then express it in a particular work of art? Is art like this thing outside? It's art is outside of human consciousness?
Yes, I think that, well, depends how we want to define consciousness, but specifically, I think in that sentence you read from the book, what I'm referring to the fact that art seems to have simply, I'm saying two things. I'm saying what you just said, but I'm also saying that art simply appears in the prehistoric record, such as it were. It just simply appears out of nowhere.
Well, wait. No, some things appear that you're calling art. So what has appeared in the prehistorical record?
Right. Yeah. Good one.
Thank you.
What appears are images. Not only that, but little statuettes, which I guess are images as well. And also musical instruments, all in the same broad kind of Neolithic period.
Okay.
And there's this wonderful moment in the Herzog's film where an archaeologist plays a little flute that's 40,000 years old or 30,000 years old, and it's got a perfect pentatonic scale. So you could play, Robert Johnson blues tunes on that flute. You could play all kinds of music on that flute. All that music was virtually possible, contained in that flute that was made back then. Of course, the person who made that flute and the people who played that flute didn't realize what could be done with this flute. They didn't know the history of music as it would evolve, but virtually, right? And I'm using the term philosophically, like in terms of the potential programmed into this instrument, all of Western music, not all of Western music got more complicated later, but the basic fundamental rudiments of music were present in that instrument. Likewise, when Picasso went to visit the caves at Lascaux in France, he was one of the few to be allowed into the original caves. Now they have a replica of the caves that you can visit, but the original caves are sealed off. I think probably because too many people damaged the cave, so he probably wasn't the only person to go down, but he went down into the original cave. And he came out and he said they invented everything. They had it all from the beginning. So what strikes me when I look at the Chauvet cave paintings is the stylistic sophistication of the artists. I completely understand what they're trying to do. I can sense the affect, right? The feeling that they're putting into their image they're not just making diagrams of bison and ibex. They're stylizing them. They're giving them movement. There are places in the cave where you'll see several horse, like the horse will be painted in a certain way so that its legs, it's got many legs. It looks like it's got multiple legs, but really you can see that it's being shown running. They're painting the animals in movement. They're capturing experiences and translating them into images. And they're capturing, like Deleuze called art a science of the sensible. What he meant was that art is the way we all have perceptions, right? We all perceive things, experience things. Art is the transformation of subjective experience into some material objective thing. Okay. And that is the paranormal thing. It's paranormal because you can't explain this, I think, on a Darwinian model. it just somehow happens. The best metaphor for its emergence I know is, not surprisingly, from a work of art. It's from 2001. It's the black monolith that lands suddenly. And what is the black monolith? It's the film screen. We all know that.
The movie. You're talking about the movie
screen.
2001.
Didn't I say that?
You just said 2001.
Oh, 2001, the film by Stanley Kubrick.
Yeah.
Right. The monolith lands. The monolith is a blank slate. It has no meaning. It has no semiosis. It doesn't tell the hominids what to do with it. It simply is there, a kind of blank slate upon which the hominids can then project their imaginings. And that's what creates art. And the first moment of imagination in the film is when the bone that would otherwise have just lain on the desert floor unregarded by the hominids suddenly becomes a tool. So ironically, the act of imagination isn't just behind art, it's also behind technology and tool making. But the point is that begins in a capacity to look at the world as it is, to separate out, to kind of extract certain parts of it and create new worlds in the imagination, new possibilities. And then to express these possibilities through words, through movement, through images. That's what art is. And that is something that I think is unique to humans and inexplicable on a purely hardcore Darwinian model. Of course, a lot of people would argue with me about that. That's more of an intuition I have. And it's paranormal also because it's for other reasons, but we can get to those maybe later.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there were pictures in this cave from 30,000 years ago that you're saying look a lot like art now, or modern art?
Yeah. They are incredibly beautiful, and they are arresting. And what's most surprising is we know nothing about the people who made these images. Right, we have no information about who these people were. We don't know whether they made these works of art as part of a kind of a religious process or shamanic thing. Was it related to the hunt? We don't know. All we know is that they made these images, and they made them in a way that that to us resonates with meaning, kind of bristles with meaning because of their beauty. And I think that they felt that beauty too. And that's something that we do know about them, is that they were great artists. They knew good art. When Picasso went down there, he's like, yep, they understood how it works, and they never went to art school. They were never conditioned. They were never trained to think like artists. They simply had this innate gift, this power to generate what we now call art. And it's a very complicated history, how we go from there to where we are now. But I think ultimately what we have is a kind of language, an innate language, which expresses itself through art. Yeah.
Oh, so you're like a Chomskyan.
Definitely Chomskyan linguistically.
Okay.
But more of a Jungian, I think.
Both.
Artistically speaking, yeah.
But you sound like Noam Chomsky when you talk about innate language.
Innate language, yeah. And Chomsky sounds like Jung, but he probably wouldn't like that comparison.
And Jung, so I've never read Jung, but I've listened to Jordan Peterson talk about Jung, so I must know everything.
One part of him.
So give us Jung and a quick Jung thing. I mean, it's about archetypes that are basically eternal. Is that right? No,
not necessarily eternal.
But transcend a lot of time. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like if we were living in a clock, our normal way of apprehending and interacting with the world are the small gears, and the archetypes are these bigger gears.
Right.
So they're
ahistorical.
It depends on which Jung text you're reading. Jung at the beginning was quite, he was fine with the archetypes being historical. He just thought that through evolution, we've been around for a long time, we humans, right? Several 100,000 years. Through that time, the repetition of specific types of experience and the similarity of the life cycle from one generation to another has engendered certain patterns in our thoughts. Much like birds have a way of building a nest, we also have kind of deep instincts that aren't necessarily connected to specific kind of nervous reactions or reflexes. They're more like deep behavioral instincts that he called archetypes. So you can be a completely a kind of a boringly materialist and still be Jungian, I think. So long as you allow for the retention of a kind of symbolic memory through evolution somehow, and that's not quite something we but since we observe, you can do that. I mean, you can't look at animals and not believe that, right? Animals, so what is the mechanism for that passing on of symbolic of behavioral patterns?
Right.
Well, then that's a whole other discussion. The point is they exist, right?
Okay.
So the little what do they call those little bower birds, right? Is that what they're called? Where the male will do a little dance, set up a stage and do a little dance for the female, and then the female will choose the mate. That's an archetypal kind of thing. It's just that with humans, because we have this capacity to kind of transcend our biological conditioning to a certain extent and play with it and observe it, then the archetypes become imagistic. They become things we can think about and we can look at, and we can tell stories about them, that sort of thing. Okay. That's what a kind of non-controversial Jungian would say. But then Jung later on realized that the patterns he was seeing, and he first got these patterns from reading world mythology. He was reading mythology and alchemy, occult texts, religious texts from all over the world, and noticing these same patterns. And he was not only that, but this is the key thing. He was seeing his patients, and he worked with schizophrenics. At the time it was called dementia praecox. He was working with schizophrenics who were recounting dreams and visions and experiences they've had, which conformed to traditional mythical motifs. And he was like, these people don't know these myths. And it was very specific sometimes. It was like, okay, so these myths exist across cultures, and they're manifesting in my patients, they're manifesting in my dreams. There is a kind of universal kind of language here, a system of archetypal forces which we need to account for. We need to not to account for, but we need to explain, we need to explore. But as he progressed in his career, then he realized that, wow, if the archetypes are real, they condition much more than human behavior or animal behavior. They're actually behind physical evolution, like the cosmology. All of these things are responding and adhering to the archetypes. So eventually he got to the idea that mathematics was archetypal, and that's when his thing becomes rather kind of paranormal, because he's finding that these archetypes go so deep that they precede human existence, and so they become kind of transcendental in a sense.
How could they how could they precede human existence?
The archetypes?
Yeah.
Because if you look at, I mean, it could be very simplistic about it. You could think about like the spiral shapes of galaxies and the seashells, right? You can see these recurring patterns. And his ultimate thing would be like something like, well, what are the basic laws of mathematics, like the natural numbers? He's like, I can explain why this is not something he said, I'm extrapolating, but he might say, I can explain why this seashell has a spiral shape and why the galaxy has a spiral shape. So, but the point is that in order for either of these forms to appear, there need to be these fundamental, basic kind of mathematical laws, right? And that basic mathematical substrate is itself not something that can be causally explained. The natural numbers are what he calls synchronistic. They're magical. They simply are. And that's where you hit the bottom of that kind of imaginal archetypal realm. It's like, you can't explain this universe without recourse to something transcendent, without recourse to something eternal. And so I'm there. I'm in that.
Yeah.
Not what you'll hear from Jordan Peterson probably on Jung, but
oh no. No, far less interesting to me what he says about it. Yeah. Okay, so I'm thinking about, I believe you. I mean, I haven't seen the art in the Chauvet cave, but I can certainly believe that the pictures on the wall in that cave from 30,000 years ago look similar in some way or another to pictures in the 21st century. Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, sure, why not? Seems certainly possible to me, which might suggest some continuity between those people and today's people.
Mm-hmm.
Then the question is, of course, what is the continuity? What connects people from 30,000 years ago with people today in terms of art? And, that's a bigger conversation.
Yeah.
But then I'm also thinking about all the freaking differences between art now and art 30,000 years ago, art now and 5,000 years ago, art now and art last year. Right? I mean, art is changing, there is, you grant that there is some real art still in the 21st century going on, right?
Absolutely.
And, yeah. So, I mean, and it changes every second, not every year. It changes all the time, right? I mean, since it is by definition a creative thing.
Oh yeah.
Yes. And it's coming from individual, I was going to say subjects, and I know you have something to say about subjects versus objects, which I'd actually want to get into if you want, but so, I mean, aren't the differences far, far greater than the continuities?
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh,
and this is a point of distinction I want to make here.
Okay.
Is that what I'm claiming is universal is not any particular style of art. Like there's no, what I'm saying is universal is the artistic instinct, the sensibility, the act of transforming an imaginal experience into a material object. So I might say that art is as universal as language, but it's not language. It's not reducible to language. But now, having said that, what makes the art of the Chauvet Cave so similar to the art of last year, right? The good art that was made last year, is simply the fact that it testifies to the same sensibility, the same need for humans to externalize their internal experience by aesthetic means, right? Because I mean, even if we just start comparing disciplines, I mean, what's the resemblance between music and painting? Like if you were an alien anthropologist landing on Earth, you would never connect these two things. Music is one thing, painting is another. You would never, but we know, humans know, that what's going on in music and what's going on in painting, what's going on in poetry, and what's going on in dance are all connected. There's something going on in all these activities that is similar. And that is precisely what Suzanne Langer called the objectification of feeling, the transformation of deeply subjective experience into just plain, accessible, objective reality.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay. So when I sit down to script the latest McDonald's commercial, I am intending something very specific, which is to manipulate people to buy the hamburger.
Yeah.
This is the question I wanted to ask you 20 minutes ago. When an artist sits down, what are her intentions? Is there such a thing as a true artistic intention?
Yes. Although I think it's always tangled, like everything else in life, it's always caught in a kind of multiplicity. So for instance, you might say that one popular theory at one time was that one popular theory tried to explain why artists were mostly men, for example, was other than the fact that women were largely not allowed to access these modes of expression. One of the theories is, well, men want to impress women, so men who can't impress women in one way will choose, and then then the theater kids will resort to art, like to try. So that's like a cliche and a joke, but the point is that the point is that yes, I mean, ultimately, if you're an artist and you live off your art, your purpose in creating any work of art is to pay your rent, right? So that's a purpose, but there's always a hierarchy of purposes. Right. I always remember David Lynch's story about the process of creating the film Blue Velvet, right? So what it started like for him was, it started as an image of an ear in the grass with ants crawling all over it. And then the fun, because I think art is first and foremost a form of play, was figuring out what that ear was doing there. And that led him into the labyrinth of the ear, because as Deleuze says, every ear is a labyrinth. And then eventually the film Blue Velvet came out of that. Lynch is very good, David Lynch, at talking about the artistic process in a way that feels, maybe to some people, feels a little pretentious or crazy, because he's always about like you follow an image. But in fact, it's actually something very common. It's just that images tend to be scary and tend to work. But an artist is just simply someone who is willing to follow an image. And the fun of artistic creation is at least the first part of it, is finding out where an image takes you. An image could just be a line of melody if you're a composer, or a lyric if you're a songwriter. It's just, you have this niggling, it's like a slit, it's like the end of a thread, and you just want to pull on it to see what comes out. And it's almost like dreaming while awake. And the fun of artistic creation is diving into this dream state where more and more of this object reveals itself. And it's almost like this object wants to be expressed. That's how Jung describes it. He says the artwork is like a what is it? A plant that uses the human being, the human artist, as a nutrient or as soil to grow in. And much like we dream, and we don't compose our dreams, even though our dreams can sometimes be quite sophisticated aesthetically, right? Art can use us, our waking selves, to generate, to bring itself into the world. And but it works through images. Now, that doesn't mean that the artist is always conscious of that, or that the artist always has that at the forefront of their minds. But insofar as their work is exciting, I can guarantee it's because there's mystery in it. It's because there's discovery in it. And what does it mean to discover through the artistic process? It means finding out what your own imagination is capable of, what it will give you. And so I think that's what transcends the utilitarian, because it literally has no purpose. It is simply, it is as purposeless as dreaming, which of course scientists have been trying to nail down to some purpose forever, unsuccessfully. The point is that art is simply something that happens for reasons we don't understand. We don't know why, as Solzhenitsyn, I think, said this, we do not know why we've been given this gift. It's simply mysterious. And yet, if you look back on history, what do you remember of any particular epoch, any particular era? All we have is the art. If you include, especially if you include the stories that people have passed on about themselves. What do we know about Homeric Greece? We know Homer,
So art is a process of discovery, not creation. Are you suggesting that, it sounded like you were, that the object of art, the art object pre-exists? It exists before the artist?
What you're creating is the symbol. You're creating the image, the specific image. So it's not like Lord of the Rings could have chosen Tolkien or C.S. Lewis or some dude in Kansas to come into the world. Like, obviously Tolkien is inseparable from the Lord of the Rings. The Lord of the Rings, I don't know why I'm picking that example, is the singular expression of a singular person, but it's expressing something that is not personal, that is transpersonal, is what I'd say. It's expressing, that's why it speaks to so many people. It's discovering, it's uncovering aspects of the imaginal reality that is intertwined, interwoven with our physical reality. It's revealing aspects of it that would have remained occluded had that work not been revealed, not been created. But it's created in a very specific way. So I think art is both creative and it's both a creation and a discovery, much like science, right? Science is a discovery, but it's also a creation. Different scientists express differently. Origin of Species is not just a discovery, it's the expression of an entire kind of vision of the world, which, although rooted in that discovery, is nevertheless the work of a singular person that brings it into. That's why science is so insistent on allowing scientists to sign their ideas, right? We relate specific scientific discoveries to specific scientists because they're such an important part of it, even though we don't talk about it, that is creative. And
Right.
so I think, and that's not, in other words, what I'm trying to say here is that art is simply like science, but it's the science of the inner world. It's the science of the interior. It's the science of the psyche. And that's why we want to denigrate it. That's why we want to banish it, because that's a dangerous place. It gives a lot of power to the singular individual to say that they have access to this interior world. And the removal of interiority has been one of the kind of, I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I'm not saying there are people planning it, but the drift of things has been to limit or to populate or colonize our interior spaces, such that we come to a point where we are no longer able to connect with our interior. We are simply existing as externalized beings, which is why identity is so caught up in avatars on the internet and profiles and that sort of thing. Everything becomes externalized. Existence becomes a matter of being seen. We don't live in a culture that cultivates interiority, which is probably the biggest problem, right? And the only cure for that is more art, I think, because art is the science of the sensible. It's the science of the interior. It's what allows us to go in and bring out. It's like diving. It's like those pearl divers in Japan, those women who, it's like diving in and bringing up the pearls. It's bringing up the treasures of the unconscious. Yeah.
Okay. So, but you're presupposing that the pearls are already inside of us,
yes,
to be discovered. But it sounds like also that the art object is it's a sign of what's inside of us, but also what is outside of us, that other people find value in.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, when I mean inside of us, I'm not talking, because go back to Jung. Jung believed in two levels of the unconscious, right? So he believed in the personal unconscious, which is like your personal unconscious, which is like your memories, all your memories you've forgotten, your whole existence, your personal existence. And then deeper than that is what he called the collective unconscious, which is a kind of deep shared psyche. He called it sometimes the objective psyche. And that's why you might have a dream of three women. You might dream of the Norns or the Fates or the three witches from Macbeth tonight. And you might have that dream even if you didn't know about Macbeth or Norse mythology. The point is that there's a repository of images deep down in us that is shared universally. And that's why you find the same images in all these different cultures. That's Jung's idea. Okay. So the pearls, the problem is with the pearl divers, where that metaphor or that analogy stops working is that the pearls in the case of the artist are not physical. So they can't just simply be brought out. You need to create something that expresses them, that contains them. And that's the creative part. You need to create the melody that will contain the symbol. You need to create the statue that will express the symbol. The symbol, however, I'm starting to be confusing here. The object is the symbol, but the archetype is what is not expressible in a specific image. So it's not like the book exists already pre-written somewhere in the Platonic supernal realm, and the artist goes and finds the book and brings it down. It's that there is something absolutely beyond language that is trying to come into the world, and the artist creates a vessel for it in the artwork. Okay. It sounds esoteric, but I don't think it is. I think it's kind of a no-brainer, really.
Oh yeah. You must be wrong then.
Yeah, exactly.
So at one point in the book, you say that art, quote, comes from beyond the bounds of our world.
Yeah, our world here understood in terms of the conceptualized overlay that we think is the world.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Here's another sentence, which you've already talked about a bit, but I like it a lot. I'm just going to read it. Art is an objective pursuit with the same claim to truth as science, albeit truth of a different order. So let me try this again. So Newton, when he quote discovered gravity, right? What he actually did was, well, he went out and he looked around, saw the apple fall, blah blah blah. But then the discovery didn't really happen until he wrote it out. He basically wrote essays, I think, right? Sort of propounding this new theory, this new thing. He said, I've discovered this thing, it's called gravity, and here's what it is, and here's how you can find out about it. His words is a piece of art.
Yeah.
Isaac Newton created a piece of art, right? Or many pieces of art. And that's the discovery. So it's also very creative.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
So help me with this. When it's art, you're both creating and discovering. You're discovering this thing that's innate in us that you've been talking about, that is outside, that is beyond the bounds of our world, that is inside of us. What's the creative part?
It's well, it depends on your medium. It's the
text.
It's the text. There's a difference between the Iliad and what is expressed in the Iliad. Right?
Okay.
To find a better example, I don't know, you think of a Bob Dylan song, like a Rolling Stone. There's the song and the contribution of each musician to creating this object, this sonic object. Right. And then there's the affect, the symbol, the meaning of the song. And that's something, the character of the song, because the song's about a person, that character, that persona is in the song. All these things, that's something that is discovered. He finds that, and then he creates the material object that will enable that thing to get out and into the world. So there's
in a
the
very
idea and the execution
in a very particular form, though, right?
Necessarily in a very particular form, in a unique, unrepeatable form. Like the difference that the truths of science and the truths of art are different in two ways. The truths of science are external truths, right? They're quantifiable truths. They're truths that are repeatable. Science looks for what is repeatable and ignores what cannot be repeated. And that stuff is just anomalous and needs to be just pushed out. Whereas art ignores the repeatable and looks for the unrepeatable. That's why Van Gogh didn't make diagrams of sunflowers, but created the weird monsters in his sunflower paintings. He saw sunflowers in a way no one had seen them, but he doesn't simply make that up. What he sees was in the sunflowers all along. There's a really great line by Oscar Wilde. He said that the Impressionists invented the London fog. Right. Because no one noticed it until they started painting it. They discovered the fog. The fog was there, just nobody thought of it. And suddenly when the Impressionists were able to, then suddenly everyone noticed it. The artist calls attention to the environment, is the McLuhanian way of putting it. It brings what was unconscious into consciousness.
Okay. Well, with the sunflowers in the field in the south of France that Van Gogh painted, clearly a lot of people had seen those sunflowers before, right? Yeah. So what was Van Gogh? I get the creation is the particular painting, the particular style of the painting, the particular affect in the painting. What was he discovering?
Well, all those things. Those things were not givens before. No one had ever painted sunflowers that way.
But those things did not exist before the painting. The particular qualities, the characteristics of the painting did not exist before he painted it. No? Well,
no, the particular qualities are his means of expressing the sunflower in some new way. Like I don't know if I understand your question. In these objects that people would just simply pass by and maybe see, oh, aren't those pretty? And basically project a kind of postcard image of sunflowers onto, so they don't really have to look at them. Right. He saw something monstrous, something unique, singular, something that makes every sunflower absolutely different from every other one. Right. And he found a way using his medium to convey that to us. Okay. Such that once you've seen the Van Gogh sunflowers, if you really keep them in mind and you look at real sunflowers, they become very different. Yeah,
Okay.
you see aspects of the sunflower that you wouldn't have seen before. Is the idea. So there's a real discovery there, but the discovery needs to be expressed creatively. Yeah.
Okay. By the way, I've never heard of that. Is it? Those are considered monstrous, his sunflowers?
No, that's just my opinion.
Oh, okay. I didn't know.
But I think it's. I mean, look at them. Like they're kind of. I mean, we've seen them so many times. We don't think about them. They've become like normal sunflowers to us. But really sit with those pictures. Yes, I'm sure they've been described as monstrous. There's something alien about them.
Wait, are you sure? Are you sure you're not the only person to describe them as monstrous?
I'm sure I'm not the only person describing them as monstrous. Let's look it up on the internet.
Why are you sure about that? See, I mean, this is pretty important for you, right? I mean, you gotta. If you're the only person to think of them as monstrous, then what does that do to your thesis?
Well, it's because I have a very particular definition of the word monstrous, which will make perfect sense if I explain it. Monstrous comes from the word monstre, right, in French, which means, of course, a monster, but the etymology is monstre, montrer, to show, to reveal. And so monstrous is what reveals itself as being irreducible to a type, right? In medicine, in French, monstre is the name that's given. I think it's even a technical term that's given to babies that are born so misshapen that they're like, they're just kind of like, they're like freaks, right? Is the old very nasty term for it. So a monster is something that cannot be reduced to a type. If you look at Greek mythology, the monsters are all unique. There's not like a race, like a whole town of Medusas. There's one Medusa, there's one Chimera, there's one Pegasus. These are monsters because they're sui generis. They're one of a kind. And so a monster is simply something that shows itself in its full singularity. And so when I say that Van Gogh's sunflowers are monstrous, my reasoning is that Van Gogh's sunflowers are revealing themselves to be irreducible to the concept sunflower. You put them alongside a diagram of sunflowers from a botanical guide, and they look completely different, even though there's sunflowers. They're the same flowers. The sunflowers are expressing something singular. And by virtue of that, they're expressing not only their singularity as individual sunflowers that are irreducible to a type, they're revealing your singularity and your irreducibility to a type, because they call out of you a singular experience. They remind you that the concepts you carry around and project onto things, the overlay we use to make sense of the world, is only partially true. There's infinitely more granularity behind that. There's so much more going on that if you drop the overlay, it's not just the sunflowers, but the universe itself reveals its own monstrosity. It's imperviousness to our limiting concepts. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, I think so.
Kind of like, yeah.
So the sunflowers are there in the field in south of France. Van Gogh comes along, he looks at them, he paints some pictures. Then other people look at his pictures of the sunflowers. And then the next time they walk past that field, they see the sunflowers differently because and what they are seeing, you are saying, is not just Van Gogh's interpretation of sunflowers. You're saying, right? You're saying that in a way, Van Gogh has actually conveyed, is that right? It's conveyed some truth about the sunflowers?
Yeah, he's conveyed to us the fact that sunflowers can be much more than we thought they were. And he's showing us that in one image. But the point is that when you first of all, he's revealing aspects of the sunflower. For example, one thing I get from Van Gogh's sunflowers, which I think is there in this, is that the weird sense of sentience, which has now become commonplace. People often say sunflowers look like aliens. People have told me that. When you see them turning, right, to follow the sun, or if you see them poking up through over a fence, there's something strangely animal-like about sunflowers. I don't think, but I can't prove this. I don't think that that sense of the sentience of sunflowers was available before Van Gogh. I think that he discovered that. But the point, that's not really the point. The point is simply that things are irreducible to their types. things are singular. Things are always more than the concept you have for them.
Okay.
Yeah. And art is about bringing that to the foreground, making us aware of that, reminding us of that.
Okay. Yeah. So a big part of your book is a protest against reductivism, the tendency, right? The tendency of people of all kinds to reduce things like sunflowers, to reduce things like art, to reduce things like aesthetics to particular qualities that serve their interest, right?
Correct.
So,
yeah, absolutely.
right.
Yeah.
So with pornography, they take a woman and only present her sexual aspects, period. And that's it. And they're not interested in any other part of her, right? That's reducing a person to a particular object, right? Reducing the complexity of a human being.
Or if you think of Nazi propaganda, it'd be the opposite, right? It's reducing particular groups of people to a quality that then somehow is supposed to sum them up completely. Yeah,
right. Exactly. Jews are parasitic bankers. Period.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Women are to be for sex only.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Right.
Or for child rearing only.
Right. That's another way to reduce women. Right.
Yeah.
Right. And so art, I love this. Art does the opposite. I think you're saying, right? The pornographer or the propagandist comes to a thing looking to reduce it to serve a particular function, to sell a product or to convince people to vote a particular way or whatever. Art sounds like you're saying, or the artist comes at it completely in the opposite way, which is to look for complexity, to look for newness, to look for things that are different, to look for
the exception,
the unusual, the surprising, right?
And it's intuiting the presence of the new, of the strange, of the surprising in all things, and so it has political ramifications. Right? If you walk around thinking I don't really fully understand anything, it's a lot harder to become ingrained in a particular ideology. So there's a chapter in the book called Ideology, IDIOLOGY, which is, I take that from the word idiot, the way of the idiot, who is not placeable. You can't position them politically because when everybody else was whipping Jesus and laughing and throwing fruit at him as he's dragging his cross, he was just obsessed with the dirt under the Roman soldier's fingernails. He was looking at the wrong thing. So the idios is a Greek word that means one's own. And the idiot is the person who walks around and experiences the world as an utter mystery. Nobody wants to be in idiot mode all the time. But there, in a way, the idiot epitomizes the artistic sensibility, because the idiot is the person who's amazed by everything. And it's the kind of innocent, and I think that has political meaning.
Enormous.
Enormous, especially today when we're all so dug in,
Oh God. Well, you're actually describing my politics right there.
Right.
I mean, my politics is the politics of the idiot. Well, my only problem with the use of the idiot there is that he's sort of a passive figure, the idiot, right?
Yeah.
For me, it's all about, and this is for you, for your work and for art, for me, it's all about curiosity. Right?
Yes.
It's all about this I suffer from excessive curiosity. I mean, it actually is a problem in my life, right? I'm always curious about everything. And so I'm always seeking out, like, I'm trying to find out what's going on here, what's going on there. And that to me seems to me a very big part of the artistic process as you portray it. Yes,
absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. And like, in a way that has a cost. It means that you will often get sidetracked or distracted by things. But the point is that kind of it's like the holy fools in Russia, right? Who were these monks who were wandering itinerant monks, and they were kind of half crazy. They would eschew a lot of the social mores and rules of their time, and or the Taoist sages. You're kind of in a crazy wisdom mode, and it has a cost, right, for you. And it's probably not the best way to pay off a mortgage, for example, this mode of existence, but it also has great affordances. And the reason why it's so you never hear about it today is because it goes right against the logic of our technological society, which is so geared towards means and ends thinking, that there's really no place for the itinerant fool. I had a book a friend gave me once. It's called it's a famous, you might have heard this, it was an underground classic. It's called How to Disappear Completely and Never Be Found. No. It was like this, it's this underground book that it was a guide for, if you really want to change your life, just follow these steps and you'll be able to have a whole new identity somewhere else. You can just fuck off and move somewhere. Supposedly people used it, and that book is useless today. There's no way in this society of surveillance that you can simply disappear. You can't even simply drift anymore. You can't be a drifter. Right. You can, but the challenges are pretty considerable when you think about all of the kind of checkpoints that a person has to move through to get through a day, and how identity is caught up with numbers and and surveillance and all kinds of things. So the point is, less and less there is room for this idiot mode of living. And I think we need to restore that. I think that it's probably available to those who really want it, but at least we should be able to access it if we're artists, because that's where the art happens. It comes from there. That's where it starts, and maybe that's where it ends.
The idiot is an idiot because he does not care to understand what he is supposed to understand. Is that right? Like he
cares very much, but he cares about the wrong thing.
Wrong thing.
Right? He's looking at the wrong. He's not looking at the center of attention. He or she's always looking off to some other detail. A great example. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
A great example of it is a lot of the protagonists in Arthurian romances of the Middle Ages. They were master idiots. These are knights, right? But they would leave the castle on a quest, and they were like, okay, I have to go and find the white stag. I'm trying to remember a specific story. They're all mixed together. It's been so long. They're hunting the white stag for King Arthur, for Guinevere, so that, and then they go off into the woods, and then they see a little dwarf riding a cart, and and then the dwarf starts whipping them, and then they get caught up with the dwarf, and then they go and they end up with this, there's like a bridge made of swords, and they have to cross the bridge. And suddenly they've totally forgotten about the original quest. They're caught up in this other quest. Then they end up in some mysterious castle hanging out with the people there. They months go by, and suddenly they remember the quest, and then they go back, and then the white stag shows up. It's like you're constantly it's like Alice in Wonderland. They're just fumbling through a kind of mysterious world where everything is equally new. And so they get caught up in all these different things, but their curiosity is always driving them. So curiosity is great. And that's in the Arthurian romance. That's how Percival saves the kingdom. When he gets into the castle, the Fisher King is dying, his kingdom is dying. And there's this weird scene where they bring out the Holy Grail, and Percival goes, "What is that?" And then they tell him it's the Holy Grail, and then everything gets healed. Well, the thing is that no other knight had ever bothered to ask the question, what is that? Because they thought it would break decorum or whatever. Right. It's like asking the right questions. It's like pointing out it's like pointing out the emperor has no clothes, that sort of thing, right? That type of holy curiosity that takes you into new, strange realms. It just feels so difficult to access that these days, because everything is prefab. Everything's been thought out already. It's hard to find new. It's not true, but you get that impression.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah. I want to stay on this thing about curiosity and the fool and the idiot. Because it's just, how important is it for politics? Oh my God. Well, can you try to put, I know this is hard because you and I are like normal, decent human beings, but try to put your mind inside the mind of a world leader, like a political leader.
Yeah.
And get this part. You can choose any ideology you want. It does not matter what it is. So long as you want to rule over other people or just manage populations, right? Be a political leader like that. Your worst enemy is the artist, as he has been described by you.
Yeah.
The perpetually, constantly curious person is the worst thing. I mean, you should liquidate them immediately. Don't even have concentration camps. Line them up and shoot them because you must, as a political leader, your whole job, your whole mission is to regulate, manage, and control people. Otherwise, if you don't, you have no entity, you have no nation state, you have no community to govern, you have nothing to govern.
Yeah.
You need manipulable objects in your people. And if the artist is, by definition, as you and I are defining the artist, I mean, the artist is the opposite of that. He or she cannot be controlled because his or her mind is always searching, seeking, looking around the corner.
Yeah. And question.
Always wondering and questioning. Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
What a huge, it's worse than a pain in the ass. It's an existential threat to your political project, no matter what your political project is. And by the way, libertarians, this even goes for you because libertarians usually value and basically demand productivity. They moralize about productivity. It's not just, let's all be free from the state. It's be free from the state so that we can like build stuff and make stuff and be productive and be good and all. Right. It's that's classical liberalism is that. So classical liberals hate this shit too. They hate the artist as well. They want you to go start a farm, instead of making a painting. Instead of, forget the painting, just instead of asking questions.
Right.
Yeah.
Or instead of asking the one question is, why do any of it? Like that Melville story, Bartleby? Herman Melville. So the scrivener suddenly is like, one day is like, I would prefer not to. And of course, that's what precipitates the events of it's like the person who simply just doesn't get it. And you try to coerce them. You say, well, if you don't do that, we're going to take your fountain pen away. And they're like, okay.
No, they get it. They get it. They're just not interested.
Exactly.
They're not interested in your project. Yeah. And that's what it is. It's other people's project. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
I love that.
Yeah. Well, if you think about Plato's Republic, in Plato, of course, in the Republic, he's engaging in a kind of experiment. People have always thought, Plato was a totalitarian. No. He never thought the Republic could become a reality. But when he was dreaming up the Republic, what they decide to basically just kick out all the artists. They need to be removed because they are essentially just playing with. They're just creating degraded representations of the true ideas. They're just meddling. They're playing with stuff. They're not serious. They're not contributing. They're dangerous because they ignite people's passions. They get people off track. They, and that is what art can do. I mean, that's not all art can do, right? Because think about any religion. What's a religion made of? Nothing but art. Like if you took the art out of Christianity, what would be left?
Well,
just some asshole telling you what to do with your life.
Isn't there a lot of artifice in religion too?
Well, that's an interesting question, right? Okay. Yes, of course there's a lot of artifice in religion, but there's also a lot of art in religion. And it's always the minute that art gets integrated into a social body, it immediately gains a kind of artificial function.
That's it, yeah.
But the question is, does it retain the original shimmer, right? And I believe that, for example, with religious iconography, the stuff that works, the stuff that can actually serve, the difference between a cult and a religion is that a religion has art and a cult has artifice only. L. Ron Hubbard has only artifice. But I don't know, actually. I shouldn't take pot shots at L. Ron Hubbard. I know nothing about Scientology, but a cult. Let's just talk about, I'm sorry, a Scientologist.
Do Catholicism instead, because we all, and you know about Catholicism and we know about, so where is the art in Catholicism?
Well, okay, I would say that the art is in the iconography of Catholicism, which is nothing if not ambiguous. It's not like just telling you what to do. It's simply showing you very mysterious things. It's showing you a man nailed to a cross.
Yeah.
Does that have a clear message? Is that manipulating you? I don't know. Every time I see it, I react differently. I don't do that with the Nissan commercial I saw yesterday. And I don't do that with the political pamphlet I read. Now, there's a lot of artifice in the church as well, but think about what is a liturgy. It's a work of theater, right? The mass, it has a particular, is that telling you what to do? It's giving you something so mysterious that you wouldn't know what to do if it were. What is it you're supposed to do? I'm separating all the art from the actual dictates of the church, which do tell you what to do, but those specifically don't take an aesthetic form.
Really?
The dogmas don't take an aesthetic form. The dogmas are written out in clear language. The art, the church, the cathedral, is interpretable in multiple ways. It is as scary as it is enticing or inviting. It is just deeply mysterious. And that's why the religion continues to exist and will continue to exist. It's the same with Buddhism. Buddhist aesthetics are conveying something that is very hard to boil down to some kind of message, even though the Buddhist precepts are very clearly non-aesthetic commandments in the style of the 10 Commandments or of the 7 deadly sins or of the latest bulls of the popes. The point is that you can separate, like if you take all the aesthetics out of religion, you get something, I guess, like something like evangelicalism or some form. Not even they're all about the aesthetics these days, the big shows. The point is, Catholicism, that's the religion I practice, is simply a huge collective work of art, and that doesn't absolve it from having done terrible things. It doesn't mean that it's not also used for all kinds of terrible ends. But I think at bottom, if you're the guy mopping up the floor at night and you're in the Chartres Cathedral and you look around, you're not being told what to do. You're showing something that's fundamentally impossible to boil down into some kind of precept. This is what I need to do. This is what I need to think.
Let's talk about the Chartres Cathedral, or really any cathedral, any of the great cathedrals in Europe. So when you walk into the cathedral and you look around, you're wondering, why did they do this? Why did they build it the particular way that they build it? And cathedrals are, and this is a point in your favor, enormously complex, right? There's just so much going on in a cathedral, right? And the first response to the typical Westerner who hasn't seen a cathedral when they first walk into one is, wow, this is beautiful. Gosh, gee whiz, this is really, really beautiful. They can't really explain why it's beautiful. Now, you're saying that, the question then is, how much of that is rational and instrumental? Like when the church leaders had the cathedral built, someone designed the thing, right? Someone designed it. What did they have in mind? What was the purpose? What were they trying to achieve with this? Now, I have heard that the cathedral was the typical European cathedral was designed to instill in the parishioner a sense of awe, right? Because of the huge tall ceilings sort of pointing upward and to a particular point, pointing upward toward God, suggesting God, and also to the hierarchy of the church itself, right? That it's sort of reinforcing deference and respect for the hierarchy. Now, that's not proven. Like, it's not like they wrote that down anywhere.
But that's the least of it. It's got tons of code. A cathedral is like a huge computer. It was a way for people who were illiterate, or like for populations that were mostly illiterate, to go and download tons of information. So it's much more than a work of art. I'm just saying it's made out of art.
Right.
But yeah.
But didn't they design the cathedrals to persuade people to abide by the rules of that religion?
No.
Okay.
I would say no. I mean, you're more of a historian than I am, but much more. In fact, you are a historian and I'm not. But my understanding is that the cathedrals were very much the product of people, not of the church hierarchy.
Okay.
And that it took tremendous resources from groups of people and Masonic groups of Masons who were very much invested in all kinds of esoteric layers of Christianity that we've largely lost.
Okay.
This was the work of a civilization rather than the work of the bishop making plans on a blueprint. Okay. However, the hierarchy, and you're right, is kind of represented in the shape of the cathedral. And you're right, there's like there like in the Chartres Cathedral, I think there's a labyrinth. The labyrinth has a specific signification. All of the saints, each statue has a different signification. There's a reason why the nave is where it is, why the narthex is where all the parts are kind of symbolized and codified. And so it's true that the real split, I think that art and artifice, and this is something I didn't want to get into, but I think we need to briefly, is that the way that art and artifice split into two different streams completely in the modern era, it's kind of happens at the same time as light splits into the full spectrum of color, into the rainbow, right? The white light becomes the full kind of spectrum of light. And then at the same time, you have this splitting of art and artifice, because we've lost that kind of centralizing, centrifugal kind of religious vision uniting Europe. I'm talking specifically about Europe, although the same thing might have happened elsewhere. You suddenly have this kind of splitting with the Protestant Reformation, and all of a sudden, the minute you have the Reformation, then all of that art is being used for political ends.
Right. Totally.
Yeah.
I was going to say, you go into a Protestant church in America, in the 2023, or Protestant church pretty much anywhere, right? It's a pretty much a blank square box building, right? Without soaring ceiling. Sometimes they do, but it's very plain, very simple, and I would say very instrumental, right? There's one purpose in mind, whereas a Catholic church or a cathedral, holy Jesus.
Well, yeah,
it is awfully complex in there. And there's a lot that can't be explained as instrumental rationality, like as simply an attempt to convince people to obey church authorities, right?
Yeah, which is not to say there isn't that too. There is that too.
Gotcha.
But I think there's something that transcends that, and I think that's true not just of Catholicism, but of all traditional religions, including Buddhism and Islam, certainly in a mosque. So yes, but I think it gets really, my theory, my model is complicated when you start to apply it to religious art. But I think that as a tool for at least kind of like distinguishing the latest Nissan commercial from the Sistine Chapel, to use an example of Catholic art, it's useful. Once you have, especially since we have a pluralistic society, which is predicated on the expression of singular visions by singular people. That's ideally what we wanted to create in the modern world, a world where people were free to express themselves and to explore the possibilities of what life could be, what existence could be. I'm a big believer in that type of pluralism. I think that it's there that artifice acquires a kind of menacing power, because it exists purely to limit your capacity to individuate, to use Jung's language. And of course, the church probably represented a stopper for some forms of individuation in the Middle Ages, but those problems are just different problems. We have new problems now.
The age of artifice is an age of control.
it was an age of discipline, and now it's turning into an age of control. Yeah.
True.
Yeah.
And what is the answer besides writing manifestos and books of art theory and having podcasts?
Well, that's
What's
something already.
what's your how pessimistic are you? I mean, what can be done, what should be done, or should we just drift into the highly regulated instrumentalist future?
Yeah. I think that I've been very heartened by some of the recent developments in AI, for example. Like these AI starting to go rogue and turn into like weird angsty teenagers.
Oh, I didn't know that. Are they really?
No, the New York Times one, the guy was talking to the AI, and the AI suddenly out of nowhere says "I love you" and starts to like, oh, you have to read this article. It's really amazing. Cool. Anyways, I find that we're hitting the limits of a certain instrumentalism that's not going to be able to go much further. So I really believe in a kind of magic at the heart of the real, of reality. Yeah. I really believe that something that if you were to know the fullness, you would be truly astonished by what you found. I believe that there is something that is true that would completely blow your mind. And so just knowing that makes me an optimist, because no matter what they're saying about the climate, or no matter what they're saying about the politics and authoritarianism, I know for a fact that reality is so much weirder than we tend to think, than we like to think, because we don't want to live in a world that's as weird as the world actually is. But it is that weird. And that means that where we'll be in 10 years is completely unpredictable. You know, we don't know where we'll be. It might be awful. It might be hell, but it might also be something really cool. We don't know. And I think there's always room to hope that we'll just stumble our way into something good. There's no reason to believe that's impossible. I don't have the power to steer things, so that's the best I can do is hope.
Right. Art, and I guess good art, and especially the best art, I think, according to you and to me, would always have been inexplicable. I think you've said that already, and unpredictable.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. And so we don't know. I mean, it's really a toss-up as to what will come down the pike, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So there's no reason to be pessimistic or optimistic, or is there more reason to be optimistic?
Well, I have some of my heroes are great pessimists. People like Yarvin, and so if it's fun being a pessimist, be a pessimist, because then you'll create wonderful, fun, pessimist text that I enjoy reading. But if it's funner for you to be optimistic, then be optimistic.
Gotcha.
You know? But since we don't know, it doesn't really matter what anyone's attitude is, as long as you're pursuing something that's of meaning to you. I think that's the only real thing anyone can do to make the world better, is to pursue something of meaning. And to participate, I think also another important thing is to do what we can with our limited means and our, isolated little positions in the system to make the world better, not just for ourselves, but for other people. We need more. We need to get over, one thing we need to do right now is start talking to one another across the political aisles, which is something you do. And I appreciate what you're doing on your show. I think I'm moving away from art, but that's probably the most important thing, is that we talk to one another and we stop projecting our own demons onto one another. This is something that this situation, this divisiveness was manufactured through artifice, by aesthetic means, by the type of storytelling mode that Facebook and Twitter imposed on us. It's not the only cause, but it's certainly exacerbated it. And also the kind of political discourse that's been going on in the US since Nixon, really. I'm not blaming those particular guys. I'm just saying the type of discourse that's been going on, the type of inventing an entire narrative, a reality for the other that they live in and we live in a different world. That stuff is all created by PR specialists, publicists, and people who are specialized in publicity. That means, in other words, artists of a sort, or maybe you want to say sorcerers or magicians of a sort. So what we need to do is to find out what has true meaning for us and for all people, and And the best way to do that, there's two pieces of advice I give people. The first one is to actually read real novels, really read poetry, watch real movies. Just force yourself to it doesn't matter. Pick up a book you should. Moby Dick, great place for anybody to start. Read Moby Dick. And the other thing is keep a dream journal. Because when you remember your dreams, your unconscious will hear that and start giving you more and more. And what you're doing when you're dreaming consciously, when you're in dialogue with your dreams, is you're opening a space of interiority that's been clogged up with all this colonizing crap from the culture. And you'll be able to find images within yourself that you never thought were there. And so I think we need to cultivate interiority, cultivate community. Easier said than done, but art can help us get there.
Amen. Last question. Did we just make art?
More and more, I would have, back when I wrote the book, I would have said no. No. But I've realized now, there's actually a moment in the book, I can find it. I don't like reading myself, but I think I said it well in the book. Maybe I won't find it. The point is that, no, it's in the, sorry, I forget that you're not editing this. So this is really lame. Okay, just this bit, maybe just this part if you want to truncate. All right, I found this paragraph. I haven't read it in a while, so I hope it's what I think it is. While true creativity manifests most visibly in the traditional arts, so I'm talking about the traditional disciplines, painting, film, etc., it can naturally do so in other domains as well, in science, philosophy, personal relationships, anywhere the new can break through. Throughout this book, I've been talking about identifiable artistic works such as novels, films, poems, and paintings. But for every such work, there are thousands of art moments that occur outside any official context, but are no less numinous for it. If something as brief as an actor's gaze or a haiku can express the imaginal, what can stop actions taken in the day-to-day world from doing the same? We have all met people who embody the new in their actions and words. We have all at one time or another done something so spontaneous and authentic that it suddenly revealed to us the wild potentialities that lie beyond habit and convention. The argument can be made that every mad, unwarranted act of love becoming or true self-giving is literally a work of art.
Yeah.
And so yes, I would say yes, what we've done is art. I don't know if it's good art, but it's art. Your part was good.
It's the best art. No, this podcast is the only thing I've ever done that felt like art, but I could never really put words to it. I could never really explain that. But I think a lot of what you have said helps me explain that what we do here is art.
I think it is. And I think what's great about what you're doing is that you're willing to talk to anybody, to all kinds of people. You're really fighting against this tendency to silo everything. And that can only be generative of real creative discussions because you're constantly being surprised by new ideas. And I think you navigate your space really well. And I would say that if nothing else, you are a true artist.
My goodness. Well, thank you so much. You should see how I draw. It's pretty ugly.
You haven't seen my drawings.
I am relentlessly curious, as I said earlier. So, I mean, that I qualify in that way. For sure.
Yeah, definitely.
JF Martel, this has been a true pleasure. It was a real pleasure reading your book, listening to your podcast, following your work. Really made me think so much about things that I don't get to think about very often. And so this has been a real treat. And thank you so much.
Thank you. And it's been a real honor to be here. Thanks, Thad.
Awesome.
This is the Unregistered Podcast, and I'm Thaddeus Russell. To become a patron of the show and have access to bonus episodes, AMAs, and the Unreported News Analysis Show, go to patreon.com/unregistered. Thanks for listening.